Let's get some good news up in here before we pause, because we do have some good news. First of all, there's been a strike going on in Chicago that you guys brought to my attention. And I believe Christina tweeted this article. But the Chicago Symphony Orchestra went on strike recently. And here is what's going on there. So a strike at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra stretched into a second week Tuesday as the musicians garnered support on the picket line from both artists and members of Congress. The musicians have been carrying picket signs instead of instruments since last Monday, as negotiations between the Chicago Federation of Musicians and the CSO Association appear to be at an impasse. Fellow performers from theater and television joined the picket lines on Tuesday. Another week of concerts has been canceled. The musicians say they've made too many contract concessions over the last decade, and now have wages and pensions that languish behind comparable world-class orchestras. Now they're seeking a significant wage increase over a number of years, bringing annual base salaries to nearly $164,000, which is in line with what musicians in Boston and New York are paid. They also want management to increase pensions. We find ourselves falling behind and on a path that will take us even further behind, said negotiating committee chair and bass player Steve Lester. We are looking to find an economic package that will keep us in pace with our colleagues and in other orchestras. That's all. In a press conference call this week, the Symphony Orchestra's board chair said the union's demands are unreasonable and detrimental to a sustainable future. What's your salary, board chair? What are the salary of the people in the administration end? What are they getting paid? Because Chicago is one of the biggest cities in the country. It is actually bigger than Boston. So if the symphony in Boston can pay the players what is the going rate and Chicago can't, well, why can't Chicago? Do people in Chicago not like to go to the symphony as much? I doubt that's true. I highly doubt that's true. They love their music in Chicago. They have some of the most amazing jazz clubs in the world in Chicago. So I doubt that's true. So somebody's buying the tickets. Somebody's making this money. Why can't Chicago pay what Boston can? All right. Let's look into this a little more, and then we're going to talk about it some. Adding to the political pressure to resolve this labor breakdown at one of the nation's foremost cultural institutions, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi wrote a letter in support of the musicians saying, quote, Democrats stand in solidarity with you in asking the Chicago Symphony to come to the table with respect for the value of your work. As the strike continues, the musicians plan to give a series of free concerts. The first will be a small chamber concert March 22nd at Pianoforte Studios, and the second will be a full orchestra performance March 25th at the Chicago Teachers Union Main Hall. So if you live in Chicago, check that out. Go see your symphony. You know, I don't know if they still do this in LA, but they used to do a thing where at the Hollywood Bowl, occasionally the symphony would rehearse there, and it was free to attend. And it was in the late afternoon, and, it just dawned on me that I totally cut myself shaving this week, and I think my cut is very visible. I'm a dumbass that cuts myself shaving. There you go. There you go. I'm a dumbass, and I cut myself shaving. I cut myself on Monday. I just cut. It was actually kind of cool because I not cool, but I was cutting myself. I was shaving and then I cut and I was like, shit, and I'm like, and I gotta go to the studio over the Jimmy Dore show, and I was like, I was bleeding everywhere, and then Jimmy texted me and he was like, hey, we're not shooting today, and I was like, okay, I guess that's kind of a blessing. So I'm bleeding everywhere, and then it's like, Scab's still gonna be there, buddy. Scab's still gonna be there throughout the week. Don't worry, there will be plenty of documentation of you not being able to shave your face like a human being. Cheers. So, if you're in Chicago, check out those shows. Now, here's the thing. Because some of you may have seen that number and you're like, well, gee, that is a lot of money. Here's the deal. I'm not an expert on the, on kind of the anatomy of how the symphony industry works. I'm certainly not an expert in that. But I do know how show business works. And I do have a little bit of experience with how symphonies and stuff like that work because I went to Indiana University, which is a very, very big music school. I lived across the street from the music school. I actually minored in music, which I don't like to talk about often because I haven't done shit with it. But I used to be able to sing well. Now I sing slightly below average. I'm not a great singer. I'm not totally atrocious, but I'm not good. And I play guitar poorly, but I have fun with it. That's all that matters. So anyway, I knew a lot of professional musicians, people that were in graduate school at Indiana University that were trying to get their master's in composition or whatever it may be. And the way those jobs work, you don't start out in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, typically, unless you're a real, true prodigy. You don't start out there, typically. You start out in a smaller symphony, in a smaller market where you're not getting paid very much. You're just making enough to survive. And you really have to pay your dues. Some people never land a job in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Some people have to move to other parts in the world to try to find work. I knew people that were friends with my dad's. They were colleagues of my dad's over at CMU. They were musicians. And this is at Carnegie Mellon University. Again, a very, very prestigious music institution. And they could not find work. And they were doing some stuff with Pittsburgh, but that's a smaller market. So they were not making enough to really, they were making enough to live, but they weren't quite making enough to see what they needed to see. And it was a husband and wife. They were both professional players. They moved to, I believe, Argentina, because that's where she was from originally. And there, if you get a position, it's very competitive and very hard to get. But once you get it, you're in there for life because it's funded by the government, and so they really take care of you. But the jobs are extremely competitive and hard to get. But they thought, if we get this, we're just going to be set. We're not going to have to bounce from gig to gig. We're not going to have to hustle. We're not going to have to, know that we can move at a moment's notice. Because that's the other thing. You might have to move to a different mid-sized market. You might have to move to a different big market at any given notice. It's like being a radio personality or being, in some cases, being a comedian. Comedians have to move around a lot depending on what your world's like. You might become a big college act, so you need to live kind of in the middle of the country where most of the college campuses are. You might become a big cruise ship act, so you have to live in whatever city your cruise ships dock out of often. You might get in with a big Vegas headliner that takes you under their wing, so it makes sense for you to live in Vegas because you're doing 12 weeks a year there. Anyway, you get the idea. You get the idea of what show business is like. So my point for bringing all this up, the Chicago Symphony is not a starting point for most musicians. So if they're getting screwed over at that level, this is an instance where it actually does trickle down, because it trickles down in a bad way. If you're getting screwed over in Chicago, they're going to screw you over in Indianapolis. They're going to screw you over in Louisville. They're going to screw you over in Pittsburgh. They're going to screw you over in Columbus. They're going to screw you over. And then the pay scale gets worse and worse and worse. And a lot of these people, they've paid their dues. Well, all of them have paid their dues they've all paid their dues. So that's the big issue here. Is that, when the arts are not compensated the way they ought to be compensated. And again, why should if Boston can afford to pay their players a certain rate and Chicago can't, the problem's with the administration in Chicago. Because people are buying those tickets. Those tickets are being sold. Chicago's one of the biggest cities in the country. It is, again, it's bigger than Boston. So why can Boston do something Chicago can't? Well, because there must be corruption somewhere. So that's what's going on here. So I support these players striking. I'm rooting for them. I hope they get what they deserve, which is to have their pay scale on board with Boston and New York and other symphonies of the world. They are a symphony of the world. They should be compensated accordingly. And if they're not, that problem's going to affect them, and it's going to affect everyone else too. Because then the other thing you risk seeing is that Boston's going to be, well, Chicago, they get away with paying this. We're going to pay this. We're going to pay this. If you don't think artists are screwed over as much as possible, let me tell you something. We are. They are. Artists, whether you're a musician, a comedian, an actor, a writer, a symphony player, whatever it may be, you're going to get screwed over a lot. And they'll screw you over when they can. And when there's an opportunity to cut pay, they cut it. I come from the world of stand-up comedy. Back in the 80s and 90s, comedians were making a bigger dollar amount than they make now. Like literally, not adjusted for inflation, like literally a bigger dollar amount. It is one of the only industries in the world where the pay scale has numerically gone down. It's numerically gone down. Comedians used to make twice as much in a week as they make now to just play a comedy club. And it's because, you know, the boom the bubble burst a little bit. Clubs wanted to see what they could get away with. They got away with paying a little bit less, but giving the celebrity some blow or whatever. And then it just kept diminishing. And now there's some spots that used to be, you used to be able to make a living as an MC, which is the opener that introduces the other acts. You used to be able to make a living doing that. Now, sometimes MCs don't even get paid. They don't even get paid. Sometimes all they get is a free meal and a beer, if that. You used to be able to make a living doing something that you're not even paid for now. So that's why this strike is very important. I stand with these Chicago's musicians. I hope they get what they deserve, which is that pay raise. And they shouldn't have to make any concessions. And shame on the corruption going on within that organization that got it to this point. All right. So good luck, Chicago. And if you're in Chicago, check out those free shows. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and